Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
I think we're going to need to review the alphabet, Legion, because you said it starts with an I.
My memory is horrible. Yeah, Banana went live and I resubbed to his channel and I put down, shut the fuck up and play the game. Because he was like, thank you so much for the resub. And I was like, shut the fuck up and play the game.
He does talk too much. He doesn't stop.
He's too nice.
Which is weird, because like in person, I'm a colossal asshole.
This is absolutely...
Off stream.
I admire how fake you are.
Well, welcome on into the Gamers Advocate podcast.
Every time.
Yeah, you're looking good today, Com. You're good. You're good. Yeah. Banana's got his signed shirt on for a Halloween podcast. Welcome to Spoopy Month.
I didn't have a seance shirt, so this is close enough.
There you go. And we have a special guest today, Babbaganoush.
Stay still.
Help me!
What the fuck? That was good. Camel toe. The other dark meat. Don't quote me on that.
What kind of cookies would you like?
The good ones. Watch out! Well, she left me the cookie pan, at least that. She fucking left me the cookie pan. Pika, I'm leaving. What a twist. I'm on Baba's side. Thank you, Pika. What the fuck is that?
Why did you die again?
How did I die?
This is so... No, God! Yep.
Watch out, because there's one of those little ghost thingies around here somewhere. He's going to pop out on us. Oh, another maze. Or another thing. Oh, fucking damn it. Stay away, bro. First time I've ever got him to fucking not kill me. Yes.
Babbaganoush has a Twitch channel where he does mostly horror stuff. I've seen him do some other things too, but he's well beloved in his community. A lot of other streamers really adore him. I've never heard one bad thing about Babbaganoush, and I wanted to bring him in for our Spoopy Month because, man, I love horror games and I love all things horror, really. Horror movies, horror themes. And Babbaganoush really has played probably a ton more than I have, so it's really great to have that other side of things. And plus, as a streamer, there's so many things that he can kind of come at from a different angle that even just somebody who likes playing horror games might be able to comment on. But how are you doing, Babbaganoush? Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hey, good morning, man. Thanks for having me on. About myself. Well, first of all, I guess I should address you've never heard any bad things. That's the hush money makes sure that nobody says anything about me. But no, I'm kind of new to the horror genre, to be honest with you. It's been just my streaming time. I kind of got into Phasmophobia, and that just threw me into the world of horror. So I really love it. It's other than that, I mean, there's really not much to me, man. Work in horror, that's my life.
That is one of the weirdest things I think I've found with like the community around horror media, video games and movies. Overwhelmingly, everybody I've met who is very, very into horror is like one of the sweetest people I've ever met. And it's just like, why do you enjoy terror and then have this sweet, endearing personality? It seems incongruous, but it works.
I think there's a thing I've noticed in my experience, and it's a few very specific fandoms. I'm thinking back to when you were in high school or when you were a bit younger, that you probably displayed in your personality what you liked. You probably had something about you where you could say, oh, that guy fits in with this group, that guy fits in with this group. And you get a bit older and you sort of throw away those trappings one by one. And I've noticed sort of with 2 or 3 groups, and the ones that immediately came to my head was metalheads, pro wrestling fans, and horror fans. They still love their community, and I find that they still sort of fly the flag a little bit for it. They're the t-shirts that you will still see, the things that you can still see sometimes in people's personality. And same as you, I think I've never met a person into horror that I don't like.
What about you, Com? Do you gravitate to some horror? I don't see him play many horror games.
No, I drifted towards horror, particularly movies in a very specific time. So for myself, I was never truly into horror until we had the coronavirus, the COVID lockdowns, when I found that horror offered this really beautiful possibility to change each day a little bit. I think everyone during that time, we had a bit of the Groundhog Day effect, where your days bled together, where your days were repeated. And I found that we were under, myself personally, the group I was with, we were sort of missing an extreme range of emotions. Like every day was a little bit gray, every day was a little bit beige. You didn't really have the big ups and the big downs that you had. So I found myself getting really into horror in that time because it was a chance to actually be scared. It was a chance to really experience something strong. So during COVID, I got very into horror movies. Video games, not so much, but that doesn't mean I haven't played any.
So it was a chance to just feel something again.
Yeah. It was a chance to revive my cold.
So you're saying you enjoy horror because you're dead inside. Got it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's that emotion, man. Even in a small jump scare, you can, kind of reminds you of something that that you kind of lost, and yeah, it's good. It's good stuff.
We think about just like imagine the feeling of if someone cries afterwards. They're really, really down when they cry, and then afterwards they get that boost that comes up from that release. I think horror movies can have a very similar feeling, unless you get to the end credits and the bad guy didn't lose, in which case that lingers and hangs around a bit longer.
The bad guy did not lose. Why am I watching this anyway?
Those are Legion's favorite movies.
Banana gets it more and more. I'm telling you. Go Vader. Hashtag Team Vader. When James Earl Jones died, I was just like, man, can I just reset today?
That was one of the few celebrity deaths where I actually genuinely felt something when I heard the news. With a lot of them, it's sad. It's, nobody's celebrating, but there were very few that actually had an impact on me directly. Well, depending on the celebrity.
Yeah, I can think of 1 or 2.
Yeah, but there were very few that really actually had an impact on me personally, where I was upset, and that was one of them.
Yeah, I watch Conan at least once a month. They were with Schwarzenegger, but James Earl Jones in that is Thulsa Doom. Oh, love his lines. Contemplate this on the tree of woe.
It was a strange one where it's the old idea that I actually already thought he died. So it didn't have the full impact.
Yeah.
But weirdly, I was already missing him, and I thought it was already a shame that we'd lost that legacy. So I didn't have the moment of pure distress at his death. But of course, I was sad when I found out.
Man, I'm a big baseball fan, so he's in some of the best baseball movies out there. So I'm like, wow, just, So anybody been playing any games recently that it doesn't have to be horror based necessarily, but what have you guys been playing lately? I think I saw Banana return to Graveyard Keeper.
Mm-hmm. So I have gone back to Graveyard Keeper, and I never stepped away from it because I was frustrated or lost interest. I stepped away from it mostly because I was distracted with other games. And when I tried to go back to Graveyard Keeper, I was completely lost. And that is without a doubt because of my attention span. But it is one of those games where I kind of think there needs to be a continuing thread to your playthrough for you to truly appreciate it. And taking any kind of extended break from it really disrupts that. So I've gone back to it and just started over again from the very beginning. And it's a wonderful game. I just need to make sure I keep playing it close enough together that I can really appreciate it.
I always have to go back to it. It's one of those that if I spend a week away from it, I always have to restart. But yeah.
I saw that a friend of ours, Mitrell, I was asking how much they'd been playing the game, and they put 100 and something hours in. I had curiosity overtake me then, and I went on my Steam profile and I found friends who play it. I saw quite a few who were up over 100, sometimes over 200 hours playing that game. So, is there replayability, or are they just playing the same thing over and over?
Yes and no.
I don't think I've made it far enough
Right.
to answer that question.
The replayability happens with just it's kind of like a Stardew Valley type experience. So it could branch off many ways, but I mean, the story's always pretty much the same unless they add content.
Okay.
So yeah.
It's very much on the 2 playlist.
Okay.
And as I understand it, I'm not sure when this episode will air, but the DLC for it is currently 75% off on Steam for all 3 packages.
I mean, we can thank you for that.
Thank you, Banana, for promoting Steam. Thank you.
Yeah. For promoting stuff that Legion probably already owns. Com not really even interested in.
How about you, Baba? Have you been playing any of the? Have you ever played Graveyard Keeper, Baba?
I have not actually just put it on my wish list. So
Okay.
thank you for that.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, it's a cozy game, but there's enough horror elements there that make it really interesting. You have an Inquisitor that I know Banana hates.
Yeah, I was unable to hide my frustration with that person while streaming.
Yeah, I think Banana would probably play the game long enough just to, like, how can I get to the point where I can get rid of this guy somehow?
That does sound pretty appealing to me.
Yeah. But what about, so today, actually, I think what we're going to do is we're going to kind of just go over some, whether it's nostalgia, whether it's a more recent game that you found interesting, but maybe like a favorite game or two. It doesn't have to be like your favorite game, because it may not be like something that immediately pops up into your mind. Like when I was thinking about my favorite games in horror, Ghost and Goblins was a great game, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily my favorite game. That game is hard as hell. I mean, so I just remember it because of being so hard, and that was in the 80s. So like I said,
I was in the era of arcade games trying to get as much money from you as they can, and then when they ported it, they didn't scale back the difficulty. So
exactly,
they were trying to squeeze money out of you after you weren't giving them any more money.
Yeah, conversely, I could even say Castlevania. Castlevania is a great game. It's hard as hell, but that is a good game. That's one I could say is one of my favorite horror games. But that's kind of what I was saying, is that if there's a game or two, and maybe off the top of your head, it's like, you know what, I remember that. We'll kind of go over that, and you can discuss it about reasons why you liked it so much. But actually, let's start off with Baba this time. Baba, what's a favorite game or two that maybe you can talk about?
I think what really sticks right now, especially since it just had another installment, is Fears of the Fathom. To the older ones, just to choose different scenarios, different choices, and that kind of thing, just to see where the story could lead. And I've not been disappointed yet. It's a really good, I guess, storytelling in that whole aspect of things. It's really good.
Yeah, it's an episodic type game where, well, every episode that comes out, it's like they're trying to tell a story within it, and I think they're based on maybe real life events that have happened.
Yeah, that's real life Reddit stories of people's experiences and stuff. So yeah, it gives it that little bit of edge of like, okay, if this ever happened, oh my god,
What about any other games? Is there a game that you prefer streaming versus just offline?
Not really. I mean, my reaction off stream is pretty much the same one that I have on stream when I'm playing games. There's definitely no faking it there, but everything that I've played so far, I've really loved. I'd say everything, but a lot of the newer ones that have come out, I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with trashing a game here. Trust me. We'll trash a game to hell like you wouldn't believe.
We'll trash it to hell back.
It's my entire brand.
Between Com, myself, and Banana, that we hate Mass Effect because we say so many bad things about it. But that comes from a place of love because we know it so well. So don't feel bad about
it.
Oh, no, I feel the same.
Pushing that analogy.
Yeah, Banana's the Philly sports fan. in real life and metaphorically.
If I could throw batteries at Mass Effect, I would.
AKA Santa.
Jesus.
That idea of pride, isn't it? It's you want to critique it so it can do better. You critique it
Exactly.
because you love it so much and it's so close to doing everything right that when you do find an error, you really don't want it to be there. And you really hope they pick this up next time. We're looking at you, Andromeda. You really hope they pick that up and then they can improve again. Because I thought that series in particular, for me, it did get better and better as it was going on. I want that from my games I love. Keep getting better, polish off those corners, and really perfect it.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
think it's the same exact feeling that you get with Final Fantasy fans. Everyone who has played a Final Fantasy, well, a few of the Final Fantasy games, will have one or two things that just stand out to them that frustrates the hell out of them. Because the series overall is excellent, but there are flaws. And when you see them in a game that is so important to you, they become even more frustrating. And
Absolutely.
that's it. We're frustrated because we want it to be perfect.
Yeah.
And it's not. And it's not that we hate the game. It's that we hate recognizing that it could have been better.
What about Final Fantasy? Is there any horror elements in Final Fantasy? Like, are there like zombie chocobos or nothing like that? Or
What do you have against chocobos?
Ruin it.
we know that they can die, so I'm thinking like if they come back and I don't know. So
Just the worst.
I'm not even going to validate the.
well, what about you, Banana? What are some of your favorite horror games that maybe?
So it's interesting. I think overwhelmingly the elements of horror that I enjoy are typically more of the setting of kind of mythological horror. So things like Castlevania, I love the lore of that story. I love the world building they do there. I love the story itself. I'm a huge fan of just vampires and that kind of like mythological horror that you see in a lot of those video games. But weirdly, the actual genre of horror itself doesn't appeal to me as much. It's just not something I enjoy. I'm not going to sit here and critique it as, they should have done this better. It's not for me. But games in that kind of setting, that mythological horror setting, vampires, zombies, werewolves, all of that stuff, that has appeal to me. I really enjoy that. I'm just a baby. I don't want to be scared.
Well, there's a ton, and I made a little list. I try to put it in alphabetical order for everybody, just so that they could have it. But it was meant to be more like, here's some like traditional horror games. Here's some non-traditional horror games, just to kind of like, see that it's not just always like horror. Just because it has it in its title or its description doesn't necessarily mean that defines it for horror, for me at least, because a game full of jump scares does nothing to me. I mean, I've been on stream. I am the worst streamer when it comes to horror because there are these clips of me just like, okay, that was pretty scary, I guess.
Pretty sure it's not our friend. I knew it. They bait you in with one monster and they kill you with the other one.
Which I still need to make those specialty walk-on sounds for you guys. Just been really busy. Wow. She was mean.
And it just doesn't have that effect on me. Now, what works on me is games like Alien Isolation. That is possibly the only game that's left me anxious throughout the whole playtime. And I love the story so much, not just that in that game, but I love the alien. I mean, one of the things I have behind me, the art things, is an alien thing. I have a few different other alien stuff around here, but I love the Alien universe. And so when I was playing Alien Isolation, the art style in that game is just so well done, and the audio is incredible. And there's very few bad things I have to say about that game, but that is one in particular that, like, yes, it's horror, but I wouldn't say that. A lot of times when we quote unquote play a horror game, we're thinking Alien, right? We can kind of like, when we bring it up, it's definitely one of those that falls into that genre, but it's not one that we would say, oh yeah, Alien is definitely the horror game that, is the one that you want to reference when you talk about horror games. But what about you, Com? Do you have any horror games off the top of your head that maybe...
Yeah. Oddly enough, I think the defining horror game that I found is Alien Isolation. I think it's the one that really masters what a video game can be and what a video game can uniquely do for horror. And combining the way that it did the nostalgia for those of us who had watched the Alien movies originally, so maintaining the aesthetic that they did, the feel that you're in that original movie is unparalleled. The powerlessness that you have before your opponent is everything. That AI engine that they attempted to work on for it, incredible. But that powerlessness is what I love in horror. And that's where most of my horror gaming experience, I feel, doesn't really fit into horror per se, because almost every horror game I've played, eventually you're going to pick up a gun big enough to kill the boss. Eventually. So for me, the originals would have been things like Resident Evil, Nightmare Creatures, that one's going a little way back, Ecstatica, don't know if anyone ever played that. That was a 1994, I believe, survival horror game in a village that was being burned down, overtaken by monsters. All tank controls, fixed camera angles. It's garbage. Don't play it now. But it's really worth, in that moment, playing. In almost all of these games, you eventually take on enough power to take on the boss. And I like that with Alien, that still doesn't really ever happen. You get the tools to oppose the enemy. You get the tools to be able to dissuade it from attacking you. But right up until the end, you're hiding in lockers. Right up until the end, you're sneaking under tables. And right up till the end, even the androids are horrible. I feel it hits that beautiful sweet spot where, for me, horror needs to have an element where you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, and then once you get used to being comfortable, like, okay, I have a shotgun, I have a pistol, I have a flamethrower, then you go, there's going to be spoilers here. It's a podcast about games that we've played, so there's going to be spoilers, but then you have to like turn those in. Now you got to go to another area without any equipment all over again. Thanks. Man, that game is just great. Have you played Alien Isolation, Baba?
Actually, no, and I guess you guys just sold me on it, because I love that. I really love that. Like at Dead of Night. I don't know if you guys have played that. Exactly that same feeling. Is like you're finally making some ground. You're getting these keys. You're finding out what's happening in the story. Only get smacked in the head and have to start all over again. That feeling that keeps me going in it. Absolutely.
I just had one thing with the Alien Isolation game. I think Alien Isolation really captures kind of one of the differences you'll see within the horror genre of even in the movies, the difference between Alien and Aliens. Alien is a bunch of people who are unprepared for what's going on, and it's terrifying. Aliens is a bunch of people who are somewhat prepared. They know what they're going to do. It's much more action oriented. It's not the same feeling. They're both excellent, but one of them is very much about fear, and the other one is about almost confrontation. It's about overcoming that fear and succeeding. Whereas in the first one, success is defined by survival. And in the second one, success is defined by overcoming your enemy. And Alien Isolation, I think, captures the feeling of that first movie. You're unprepared. You don't really know what you're up against. You just know that you are overwhelmingly ill-equipped to deal with it, and you need to hide. You need to use the minimal tools at your disposal to stay alive and get out of there. And they're both horror. One of those is way more effective for me. The idea of that permanent tension that you get in Alien Isolation, that is overwhelming to me. I tried playing that game. It did not go well. But I think that's exactly why, is because I hate being in that position where I'm always like, there's something behind me, isn't there? I'm going to die. Well, that was a bad run. Let's do it again.
That is what that game does. The sense of isolation, if you will, the sense of stress is ever present. Before you meet the alien, it's ever present because you're wondering, when the hell am I going to see it? And the realization that everyone who plays this game is having a slightly different experience, because though the alien is handcrafted, even though its behavior is decided upon by the designers, it's reacting to you in a very fluid and organic way. You're almost never going to have that same game twice. And that feeling just never goes away. And you never have that moment where in Resident Evil 1, I think it's okay to spoil that, right? Where in Resident Evil 1, you eventually pick up the bazooka to fight the tyrant. And at that point, it becomes a very academic conversation about how this is gonna go. Alien, you're not going to get to that point because, like you said, it's inspired by Alien. It's not inspired by aliens. There's no fire team. We haven't figured out the bullets to deal with this creature yet. We haven't figured out how to deal with the acid blood. We haven't figured out a way to deal with the face huggers. Everything in the game is completely and utterly lethal, and you're not.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful game.
And the audio is just impeccable in that one because you're gonna like listen to an audio recording of somebody recounting, so you need information, but you're like, should I play this? Or is the alien going to be able to hear it if you've encountered it? Because obviously in a game like called Alien Isolation, you know what's going to be in it, right? It's going to be an alien. So I don't think that's necessarily spoiling it, but the audio is amazing, and it is one of the few games. And I'm gonna definitely spoil this for some people, because I found out. I assumed that when I got to a computer and I was reading stuff or I was trying to find out the code, that paused the game somehow. No, the alien's still walking around. I hated that part, but it made sense. So the immersion level is through the roof in that game for all the little things. But yeah.
Listen, I'm already anxious, okay? I don't need any more.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just banana.
But I was even thinking like games like Goosebumps games. Did y'all ever play like Goosebumps games like when they came out?
No, I read the Goosebumps book, so it was very much of that generation, but I've never played the games.
Right. I think we aged out of that. So
there was a Goosebumps game where you get like an invitation to a carnival kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, I'm not sure if this is a horror game. I'm not even sure if this is a game. That was a very strange one. I definitely was not scared by anything in that game.
Right.
Well, that's where Goosebumps did have a sense of humor running all the way through it. And I'm thinking of the books in particular now. So it never really was that scary. The premises could be scary, the ideas could be scary, but there were always little jokes. There were always things that were a bit too much. So it never really amped up the tension in the way that it wasn't supposed to, but in the way that it could have.
Right.
So they never felt like horror to me. When I was a kid, they were just a bit dark, but they weren't horror.
But now you guys get to see how all games that are horror affect me. Think Goosebumps. So that's my point, is that there's all these barometers of different levels of games and how people react to them. And it's not that I really need something horrific. The games that really resonate with me are the ones that really get to me in my head. And so things like Silent Hill. Silent Hill to me is a superior horror game because of what it does and psychologically to you. It's not a matter of like, I got to get over here. So like you said, get the gun with the Resident Evil, put the pieces together. To me, I've said this over and over. Resident Evil, I love Resident Evil, but it's just spooky mess to me. It's just a puzzle game. Silent Hill has a lot of like puzzle-like elements, but it's that psychological issue that's really hard to describe and pinpoint. But have you guys, I know Banana, you played Silent Hill, right?
Mm-hmm. It comes down to kind of the action elements of the game. In Resident Evil, there's combat. You're fighting back. In Silent Hill, you're very rarely fighting back. You're usually delaying when you do. So you might, jam a flare into some manifestation of your fears and then continue running away. But your goal is almost always escape. It's not fight back and win. And I think that element of Silent Hill is what maintains that level of horror throughout the entire series. Is there's never this sense that you are even capable of freeing yourself completely from this. Whereas in Resident Evil, there's typically a figure that represents the evil you're trying to overcome, and your goal almost always is to kill that. In Silent Hill, you're more or less dealing with your internal mental health issues, and there doesn't feel like a victory in that sense. Your goal is to be healthy. That's a really, really abstract concept to try and work towards, and to really capture in a video game. And the kind of ever-present doubt of ever reaching that point is what really drives the horror home in Silent Hill.
Yeah, all you want is solace, and the game refuses to give it to you.
No, I was going to pile up a game that I think fails on that. When you say that Silent Hill never quite gives you that solace that you deserve, you can fight back. And I have played Silent Hill. It's one of my probable all-time favorite horror games, but it was a one-time playthrough a long time ago, so a lot might be colored by nostalgia. I think it was one of the failings of Alan Wake. I haven't played Alan Wake 2. You have a very similar feeling, I think, running through the game, trying to desperately get from light source to light source so you can have that moment of reprieve. But actually, you don't need to get from light source to light source. You can just kill everything in between the next light source and yourself. And if you do that, then you can go and explore. You can see the woods and how beautiful they are. You can look for the extra thermos flasks and the pages of his writings. And I thought it got very close to setting up a dark and oppressive atmosphere, but it gave you a way out. And it let itself down in that regard. Still love Alan Wake, but it kept it feeling more like an adventure game than a horror game. It was like dark Uncharted.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it, because I have been critical of Alan Wake, not because I don't think it's a good game, but I think you nailed it there, because I do like it. I think it's a good game, but every time I bring it up, it's like everybody wants to talk about how great it is, and I'm like, it's not as good as it could be. And I think you just nailed it. Why? I never really thought about that. But Baba, have you played Silent Hill?
Oh yeah, I played through all of them. I'm really actually just waiting for that remaster to come out.
Yeah, October 2nd, I think, maybe.
Oh, perfect time.
Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Away.
I was unaware it was confirmed. God, that's a nice surprise.
Yeah, you might see it on the stream for this channel. Maybe we'll see.
Oh, looking forward to that one.
On the note of Silent Hill and abject terror, who played PT?
Oh yeah.
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 Babbaganoush, did you play PT?
No, that one's still on the list. Unfortunately, I'm playing catch up right now to get everything that everybody's telling me to play.
You know, one game that combines both the I wouldn't say it's PT. I know it's a really weird transition, but I think games are more going into a better version of that's accessible to a lot of people who wouldn't ordinarily just love over-the-top horror. But games like Poppy Playtime, I know you played that, Baba, right?
No, I haven't played that either.
Well, damn. Okay.
Me neither. You good?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that one, because it has like some of those jump scares and some of those things that appear to be innocent but are inherently creepy.
It has a lot of the same elements that Five Nights at Freddy's has.
Yeah, that's the game.
Where it feels like it's children's toys in a horror game. You've got an element of just creepiness there inherently, and then the fact that it is genuinely a horror game. it's rough. That's a tough one for me to get through.
I feel like this is going to be one of those podcasts where we're jumping a lot between games. So permit me to do another one. And this might be a slight deep take on that idea of the children's toys in particular in horror games. Did anyone ever play a game called The Seventh Guest?
Yes. Yeah, I know.
That creeped the sugar out of me when I was a kid. It's got a bit more of a feeling of a game like Myst. So you have you're not walking between areas, you're just clicking between areas, and you're going to be solving puzzles in each individual part of this gigantic haunted mansion, which is mainly filled with the toys and dolls made by a toy maker who'd made some sort of pact with the devil and retreated into his house at some point, this Hill House kind of figure. And that for me was an iconic idea at the time of what a horror game actually could be. I don't know how good it is in hindsight. I played it when I was a very, very small child. But I thought they played well with what they could do with the resources they had to make a genuinely terrifying video game.
Yeah, it got a remaster.
What?
Remaster in VR only.
Oh my days, Googling that. Thank you.
That's
recently.
a point I hadn't considered before this podcast is the VR remasters or VR ports of video games, specifically in this genre. I mean, I think I watched somebody try a VR playthrough of, I want to say it's Resident Evil Biohazard, and they were about 20 minutes into that game, and they were like, "Nope, can't do it in VR. we're gonna switch to a different version of this game. I cannot handle that in VR." And I 100% was on board. I was just thinking, like, if I were to play this game in VR, we would get about 45 seconds into it. We'd see Resident Evil at the title, and I'd be like, "Nope, it's too much. Can't handle this."
I was talking to a friend yesterday who played Resident Evil 7, which I believe is Biohazard.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, in the farmhouse with, I think, the Baker family. And she, at one point, was punched in the face by the character, by the father. And she fell over. Just fell over backwards. Like, live that moment. I couldn't imagine. No. VR for me in horror is, I think, one step too far. I like my gaming to be a little more casual than that.
Yeah, back in that day, too, the CD would spin, so you didn't always get the jump scare when they intended. They had to find that video element on the CD so that it could do it to you, and there's no telling when it was going to do it, so you couldn't always time it. I mean, you didn't know what was going to happen, so yeah, I know Seventh Guest. Came about the same time that I was playing a lot of was Sanitarium. Sanitarium is an amazing, to me, it holds up, but I'm pretty old. So Sanitarium is a game, and I'm going to reference another game later on that's in the same vein, but it does it even to a much worse degree. But Sanitarium, you kind of wake up. There's a little cutscene where you're in a car accident, and you kind of wake up in a over-the-top mental facility. You got bandages on your head, and it's basically a puzzle game that you kind of navigate your little cursor through. So there's no real like combat or anything like that. There's actually a point or two where there is like some minor combat, but it's not punishing. It's not hard to do. But Sanitarium really dives into that whole idea of not collating the information that you have, because you don't have it at all. You're trying to put the pieces together, not only from in the environment, but in your head, because everything you see around you could actually be just a manifestation that's in your head. You don't know that it's real or not, but it doesn't really kind of go into that whole like deep, creepy, we're truly insane at this point. It never really goes there, but there's a lot of really interesting parts about it. It actually has some wrestling references in it too, Com, you might like. So
continue.
Yeah.
Com was checking out of that discussion until you said wrestling.
What?
Yeah, I saw him falling asleep, nodding off there for a second. So. But Baba, do you have any experience with any of the 90s games, or are you more? I know you said you're more into the new stuff, but I mean, I'm pretty sure there's some console games and stuff that you play, and you mentioned Silent Hill too, so you can continue on that one.
Oh yeah, most of my youth was playing a lot of like Madden. It was a lot of Madden. So recently, buying a PC and doing that, getting into horror, I kind of just threw all that aside, and now I'm going back and playing all those childhood horror games that are ports, and I'm like, man, why did I give all this up? I should have just stuck with it, but I really yeah.
Well, Madden over the mic can be pretty horror. A lot of horror going on in there.
Oh yeah, man. I do want to kind of go back. Somebody said Five Nights at Freddy's and Poppy Playtime. I'm gonna be that guy. I can't play those games. Not because of the jump scares. Well, actually, yeah, because of the jump scares. There's too many of them. It's too close together. you're running to something else, and you get turned around, and it's right there. It's like, not for me.
Yeah, I think the older the older Five Nights at Freddy's don't work for me at all. It wasn't until the more recent ones. And so a lot of people kind of get into like, oh, there's this whole lore. And yes, I'm very aware of the lore. I don't think it's great, but there is lore there. But a lot of times people gravitate to the little bit that they want to like say, this is what makes it a great game. And hey, look, if you love it, you love it. But yeah, some of those early versions of Five Nights at Freddy's really are just like, this is ridiculous. But I think once they had the more recent ones are a little bit more of the modern gameplay style, but you have to kind of get into that. It's because it's really hard to get into a game that's like called Five Nights at Freddy's 4 or 5 or whatever and say, you know what, I need to go back and play 1, I guess. Yeah, you could. Wouldn't suggest it, but you can. Souls games have a lot of horror elements to them. I can't even think of a single Souls game that doesn't have a lot of horror elements to it, but I mainly think of Bloodborne when I think of classic horror, because there's so much eldritch lore that goes on that weaves into the actual mythos. In fact, I would probably argue that Bloodborne is a Cthulhu type mythos game. It just in a Souls package, but
I think everyone would probably agree on Bloodborne in particular. The other games, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, they definitely have major horror flavors, especially in the design of bosses, the design of the world around you. But again, it does suffer from the fact that you ultimately will have to beat the crap out of whatever these opponents are. And ultimately, if you can take this thing down with a sword, by the end, it's not going to be that horrifying. And then when you know the areas and you can just sprint through and ignore everything, Bloodborne probably does the best at maintaining its horror feeling. And I think there's really the one point that we discussed very briefly off camera was it's hard to do a Lovecraftian horror game. It's hard to do something where your opponent doesn't care about you, because we need our antagonist to care about us. We need our antagonist to be developing a plan in response to us. We need our antagonist to ultimately sit down in front of us and get hit. Lovecraftian doesn't let you really have that. The whole real central idea that runs through any Lovecraftian story ultimately is this idea of, well, madness, first and foremost, and that idea that your opponent doesn't care. Your insignificance is really what matters. So these great beings like Cthulhu don't really have any interest in what you're doing. And it's that sense of scale and that sense of bewilderment. Think of the Beyond the Mountains of Madness. If you think of the Call of Cthulhu, Shadow over Innsmouth, ultimately they end in people losing their mind against this great, unopposable force and its complete malign disinterest. Doesn't really fit a video game, but Bloodborne still has a lot of creatures behind the curtain, where if you're reading the item descriptions, and you'll realize that chapel that you go to dedicated to Erden, you never meet Erden. You never meet the Formless One, I believe they're called. But they still have their plans and machinations going on behind the scenes that you never understand. And that overarching continuation behind the scenes of these gods that are fighting out a war, these gods that are opposing each other, these gods that are influencing your lives, they're always there. But you can't do anything about it.
I think that last part is what really sets Bloodborne aside as the most Lovecraftian of the Souls types of games. Is overwhelmingly it feels like you are dealing with almost side effects of those who are not concerned directly with you. They just have this effect on the people around you, and you have to deal with those people. I think we've kind of mentioned previously that a lot of these games are narrative driven. There has to be some element of conflict, and in Lovecraftian horror, that conflict can't be with the ultimate horror.
Yeah.
It's kind of the peripheral horror that is developed around that central figure that makes it terrifying. And so in Souls games, you can't approach that like main antagonist, because you're never really supposed to. You're supposed to deal with the effects that they have in their never-ending quest to not give a shit about you. So you're dealing with the madness they invoke in the people around you. And I think that's what kind of separates Bloodborne. Whereas a lot of the other kind of Souls games, there's that Lovecraftian horror aesthetic that you see in a lot of the boss fights. There's, monstrosities that are supposed to just scare you by existing and looking the way they do. But the nature of the game is you have to go fight that. So that, you have to overcome that initial, I don't know what that is, it scares me. And then you find out it bleeds. So you're good. And I think that's the element of Lovecraftian horror that kind of makes it difficult to make a video game about it, because you need an antagonist for any kind of narrative. You need conflict, and it's really, really tough to develop a game where the antagonist is a concept. It's this, maddening decay that you have to somehow struggle against, even though your struggle is almost ultimately futile. It's really tough to build a game around that, particularly when the focus of the Souls games is combat. You're fighting. There's genuine physical combat. It's not a struggle. It is conflict directly made physical, and you'll see elements of Lovecraftian horror there, but it's really tough to say this is a Lovecraftian horror game because it's an action game. There's no action in Lovecraftian horror.
It's actually one of the odd things, particularly about the combat in those games, is so much is about learning the patterns of your opponents and realizing, okay, when that right arm goes up, I wait for this moment and I dodge forward and left. After that, he's going to do his left arm swing. I've got to dodge to the right, and that's my little window to get my attack in. So essentially, you're in this world where the world building feels Lovecraftian, where the monsters look Lovecraftian, but the combat is Dance Dance Revolution. It's a very strange dichotomy between the two.
Yeah. So I will be remiss if I don't mention this, but we're probably going to cover Lovecraftian specifically soon, because it's such a big topic that we could go over. But since we brought, I brought up the Bloodborne thing. I mean, from a narrative standpoint, from a literature standpoint, things like Frankenstein, there's a lot of cold or frozen elements, and what's going on there is that's the environment. So you can't fight the environment; you can only adapt to it. You can put on a coat, but it's always going to have that. It's 20 below. Right. So if you go out, you're gonna die. You have to adapt to your situation. And so what you get with Lovecraft is that pervasive horrorness, that madness is always around. It's like the weather. And that's where games sometimes try to say it's Lovecraftian, but they don't really hit the nail on the head because they don't really understand what Lovecraft was saying. He's like, this is the pervasive oppression that's going on. The gods that have no consideration for you whatsoever have basically created this world that you have to suffer through, and all the enemies that you run into are more or less adapted to the scenario. So just like you may have to go to the North Pole, and fight a polar bear, I mean, it's adapted to its situation. So in the situation of Bloodborne, for instance, you're facing enemies that have adapted to the horribleness of it all. And that should be what you're dealing with. But the overall arching, what Tom had mentioned before, with that you don't run into these actual gods or enemies, you just see the effects of them. That should be what you take back from all that, because at the end of the day, there's nothing really you can do to defeat that.
I think that's what kind of elevates the darkest dungeon games in my estimation. Is I think they capture Lovecraftian horror extremely well, because you're never going after that main antagonist. You're typically going up against somebody who has succumbed to the madness that main antagonist induced in them, and that's very much Lovecraftian horror. Is that ever-present madness that is threatening you has already impacted other people. and you have to deal with both of them at the same time. You have to deal with the fact that all of your characters are getting stressed out about the adventure that they're on. You have to deal with the fact that the people who have already succumbed to that stress are actually attacking you now. So now you're balancing your stress levels with your health levels, and it's a struggle, and that game is incredibly difficult, which it should be. It makes so much sense that you're going to struggle with that game, because the game represents struggle. You have too much on your plate to manage, and the best you can do is get by. You're not gonna come out, fresh and clean on the other side. You're just gonna be not dealing with that crazy guy anymore.
I think that's where that game does a great job, is with its health bars, plural, where you've got the physical health and that sanity health. It's just a wonderful way of video gaming that whole idea of having the madness tearing you apart from within, even where you're holding up physically. Just your characters are breaking down one by one. And I can remember playing it, and that sanity bar, or insanity bar, filled up much more often than the health bar did. I found that so easy to deal with, but just walking through, the rooms getting darker, those little +2, +4s popping up as your characters just suffered slowly, and then realizing you couldn't take them with you every single week. You couldn't. You had to give them time off. You had to go and let them engage in their vices in the town as they desperately try to hold on to their sanity. And I was going to ask then just Babbaganoush, like, if they have a game in their mind that they've played where it deals with that psychological aspect, where it deals with your characters attempting to hold themselves together, both physically and mentally.
Oh, absolutely. Senua's Saga, Hellblade, the Hellblade series. I love that game. You're fighting a very visible enemy, but you're also fighting yourself as the enemy as well. And it's very well written. I like the story aspect. I like the combat in it, but especially that inner struggle, because some things you do identify with, that this person is going through. So.
Yeah, excellent example. I've 100%ed both of those games. So yeah, it's a great game series.
I remember when it was coming out that it may be in the game. I'd imagine it probably is. But I remember reading an interview with a designer who was very insistent on people playing it with headphones to get that real sense of the voices affecting the character actually being within your head, as opposed to coming at you from your sound bar or whatever it might be.
I think that was another one of those games that really captured that kind of madness element very well, and that ever-present threat that it presents, because when you're first introduced to that mechanic, it's not very explicitly defined. It's just kind of don't fail too many times, because it's gonna get worse. And I just remember my first playthrough when they introduced that, I was like, but I suck at video games. That is going to be a problem. And it was.
Yeah, and I'm not a dodger, so I was like, oh, thank God there's a parry system in this game, because Con was mentioning, he's like, oh, you dodge to the left? Oh, you mean parry? Because I hate dodging, but that's just me,
The parry window in Souls games is way smaller than the dodge window, so dodging will become very popular in those games, but you'll see the masters parry when they can.
Thinking of our friend Phoebe, who is incredible.
The parry queen.
Blows me away every time.
I think too that one thing that you mentioned was like the health bars, the insanity bars. I'm really glad that they did not add those into those games, because then you're like you plan around that and not plan around the actual thing that's in front of you.
Well, the nice thing about the insanity bar is that it can actually become a perk. And so in Darkest Dungeon, if you push somebody to an extreme, they might actually come out of it more brave. Now, they can't hold on to that. They can't sustain that, campaign to campaign. But it actually can turn into a perk. So you want to keep it down, because there's always a chance it could break them down and make them weak, but it could actually turn into a perk. Because
the chances of it becoming a perk are also significantly lower than the chances of it becoming a permanent debuff. So
I think there's an odd feeling as well, which only came into my mind now when Babbaganoush was saying that. the idea of the sanity bar being quantifiable with numbers is a bit odd. Because people are going to break at different times. They're going to break at different things. For some people, there might be one small incident that just, cracks them. For others, it might be going on as long as you will, and they just never quite break. They're always living on the edge. And maybe having that quantifiable, whatever it might be, 100 points of sanity health, and then you cross that threshold, and then we see, okay, are you broken? Will you get this perk? Whatever it might be. There's a very video gamey feel to that. I mean, in the end, it's a video game. It's unsurprising, but it's a very video gamey way to deal with the problem.
I like to kind of rationalize that in the sense of it's not so much a numerical representation. It's you have your stress-free state and you're overwhelmed with stress state, and because it's a video game, they have to make that digital. But the actual units aren't standard. So the jump in stress that you have for one character as a result of an event is not the same as the jump you'll have for another character. So the idea is that the bar itself is the same length, but the actual value of how many events you need to interact with, how many overwhelmingly stressful scenarios you find yourself in before you reach that breaking point, that's not the same.
Okay.
So each character will have a different experience in terms of, their response to situations, and that's what kind of makes that numerical system not really matter. It's just this is how we had to implement it, but it's still very much a personal spectrum as opposed to, a universal unit of measurement for madness.
Well, I suppose I actually didn't know that about them. I assumed that it was, for example, walking through a darkened room, for example, would always give you 2 points, whatever it might be. So as I understand it, then maybe someone's going to get 4, maybe someone gets 2. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. But I was also just thinking the other reason, of course, you have to have something like this is we as video gamers are very, very quick to call out a game being unfair. And if you're not transparent with what's going on with these numbers, and then all of a sudden my character suffers their break, and you haven't communicated with me, okay, this bar is building up. This bar is building up. It's getting close to the top. If you haven't done that, I'm going to feel the game was unjust in some way, because I'm going to be unable to think about actually what has been happening. And this always reminds me of, not horror, but XCOM, the video games. I believe in the modern remakes, well, I mean, they are horrible. The modern remakes, the dice rolls you see on screen aren't actually reflective of the dice rolls taking place. They're slightly loaded in your favor. So if you have something like a 50% chance to hit, you actually have a 52 or a 53. It's slightly in your favor. But if you ask players for their perception of the dice rolls in the game, we are uniformly, globally sure that they're rigged against us. Completely. So I'd imagine if you'd lacked that solid sanity bar, effectively saying you have these 100 points of sanity and then you're in trouble, we would probably see that as quite unjust, that the game was punishing us, and in a more arbitrary way than it does.
I forget the name of all the characters in Darkest Dungeon because there's just so many of them, and that's what lends to its appeal is the variety. You can have a barbarian who's more of a DPS, and then you can have a guy who's like a meat shield, but it's the armor, so like they'll take less damage if they have more armor on, for instance. So they actually have different shieldings for the insanity meter. So you are right though, Com. As you move forward, there is a depletion of certain, because as it gets darker, their insanity potential goes up. But in complete darkness or very low light, you get more rewards. So there's also a give and take to the game with it as well.
I think Bob also pointed out something that kind of separates Darkest Dungeon, and I think it has to do with the type of combat. So I believe he said that having that kind of insanity bar in Senua's Sacrifice and Hellblade would have been kind of distracting, and I think it's because Senua's Sacrifice is kind of it's a continuous combat. It's not turn-based. In Darkest Dungeon, it feels more strategic, so having a numerical representation of your stress level makes a lot more sense, because you're treating it like a tactics game as opposed to a action-based game. And I feel like if you were to have that kind of sanity bar in Senua's Sacrifice, it would be distracting. Like, I have other shit on my mind right now. Knock it off. Like, I gotta focus on the combat itself because I need to be skilled in this moment. Whereas in Darkest Dungeon, it's I need to think about what I'm going to choose right now, and I need information to do that. Instead of a sacrifice, I need less information so I can focus on exclusively what's important in that moment. And I think that wasn't something I recognized between those two until it was pointed out that, yeah, I don't want that sanity bar in Hellblade. That would not help me at all.
I think you can add something onto that as well is if you imagine a fight in that game, let's assume that if you get hit by an enemy 3 times, it can kill you, for example. And let's imagine we represent that with a health bar and we say, okay, every time the enemy hits you, 1/3 of your bar is gone. And let's imagine that you have this sanity meter ticking up at the same time. Well, I'm going to dedicate my resources, my mental resources, my capacities to saving that 1 bar that's going down in massive jumps. That sanity bar, I'm not even going to look after a while. And maybe just after the mission, I'll think, oh, that's annoying. But then I'll carry on, and now I only care about the health bar again. So I think it also just wouldn't play into the priority of a gamer. We're too busy avoiding being hit with a sword to worry about our character's psyche. The other thing I was just going to add as well about having a health bar or having a sanity bar is I think one of the greatest things that you can do in a horror game is give me as little of a HUD as possible. There's something about the safety of a HUD, how very video gamey it feels when you can just look down and see that little glowing, hovering health bar. Just takes you out of the game for a moment, let you calm down. And that's what I always loved about Dead Space, was having not really a HUD except directly in game as your character opened up their Omni tool. I've played Mass Effect. Or they have the health bar running down their back. And everything being in world, I think just made that tension just a little bit more. You could never quite extract yourself into the safety of the menus or the safety of your health bar.
That was pretty ingenious, having the health bar on your body. I love that.
Outstanding, wasn't it?
I would never thought of that. And, kudos for sure.
It's one of those things that when you see it
makes sense.
You just realize, why didn't we do this all along? This was clearly the only way.
I think that kind of plays into something we've talked about with horror before, and the lack of information enhancing horror. Trying to guess at what's going on is inherently adding to that horror element. And I think universally in horror games, you'll see that health bar represented in that kind of analog fashion. In Darkest Dungeon, again, it's a tactics game, so you'll actually see a number. But in other games, you'll overwhelmingly see just a bar. And as Com said, you'll see it jump down in thirds, but that's an estimation based on what you're seeing. You don't know if it's 32% and you actually get 4 hits, or if it's 34% and you only get 3. That ambiguity is inherently part of horror, as not knowing how much more you can take adds so much to the horror element, to say that, like, yeah, I have to fight this boss and my health's about like 70%, maybe I can get by with this. And then the boss hits you once and it's 55% damage. Knowing that exact number takes away some of that horror. Knowing relatively like, oh, this next hit might kill me, absolutely adds to the horror element, I think.
It's not the only fear in the world, but what's scarier than the unknown? That's
exactly
why everything is worse. And my favorite representation of that in a game is Resident Evil. Opening up the menu and thinking, what the hell does caution mean? And as you play the game, you get more of an idea. But in the first few hours...
Yeah, how many of us knew how to read an EKG in Resident Evil? Like, Legion, shut up.
I do.
Oh.
But the idea that, like, you're looking at your heartbeat and you're like, I just know that needs to keep beating. I don't know what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah, I know flat bad. That's bad.
Yeah. That T-wave was inverted, so we know he's had an ischemic before.
Yeah. I'm not evaluating whether Leon Kennedy has, atrial fibrillation. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah. I think since we were talking about the psychological games, there are I'm going to really disenfranchise myself from a lot of people. You may have actually played this game, Com. I asked Banana before we started last night, I'd sent him a message that said, make sure I mention this game because it is a game probably nobody has played, but you might have done the demo. It is such a
Actual
weird
spooky mist.
Yeah, it's a game called Shine. And back in the day when they were putting demos in computer gaming magazines and things like that, it was one of them. And it was originally in German and Russian only. And what's weird about it is such a psychological dive. The guy who made it just basically disappeared off the face of the earth. Nobody's heard from him ever since the game has been put out. But you basically are in a mental institution. You get puzzles that are in English. The people talk to you sometimes in gibberish. Most of the time it's in either German or Russian. You have puzzles that really don't have any logical way of figuring out. And it doesn't always go anywhere. There is a sense of direction, but there's no real way to grasp gameplay. And that, if it isn't psychological horror, I don't know what is. Because I think they really nailed that concept in a very, very non-linear gameplay ideology. Like when you think like, how do you make a game and how do you make it interesting? It broke all the rules. And yet it kind of worked. There's another game that's kind of similar to that took a lot of those elements, and I'm trying to, it's called, I found it, I was looking in the wrong thing. It's called Yume Nikki, Yume Nikki. But yeah, Yume Nikki is a kind of a Japanese game, and it took a lot of those elements that I was talking about in Shine. Very similar, but it's kind of a pixel game, and you just kind of walk around and you open doors and you find elements that are kind of like emotions, kind of. But again, you can't really grasp the gameplay, and that's the frustrating part of it. That's a little bit about the psychological horror that makes it horror. Another game that's in that same vein, but I don't find it as a horror game, but I totally see why it's seen that way, is Subnautica. You have the pervasive feeling of dread. You have to get off the planet. You only have so many resources. You only have so much air. You have things that are trying to attack you. You have ways of, coping by crafting. I got to go out there and do this, but I am in my little crafting mode. And so you can do this and do that. So some people find solace in that, but that is a game that I could totally see where the environment itself and the, things that are going on in your head can affect your ability to cope well in that game. So, and plus there are certain enemies that a lot of people have found very, very intimidating. So I don't know. I think Subnautica definitely works as a horror title, and that's one that, like I said, doesn't do anything to me. I like the game, but it's not a horror game to me, but I totally see why it's a horror game to some.
Oh yeah, I think it's certainly a horror game. It's very, very unsettling, the entire game. For myself, I love Subnautica, and if I'd have thought of it at the start, I might have actually gone to that first instead of Alien Isolation. However, the first time I played it, I actually never met a Leviathan. Never met one, just by pure chance. Played the game and I was following along with the story. I hit some of the first big story beats. I actually won't say any because I think it's a game that, a bit like Outer Wilds, if it's spoiled for you, you really suffer in your future playthroughs. So I'm not going to actually say any, except for a cloud moved out of the way. Like I got past that bit. So I did get quite far in the story. Never found a single Leviathan, and I was just really enjoying the base building. And for a long time, I didn't realize there were actually monsters in the game. I thought it was going to be one of those games like Gone Home, where you think something is really, really off. But it actually isn't. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. And by the time you reach the end, actually, no, things are okay. So it suffered in that regard. Just by pure chance, I didn't meet these horrible entities. The scripted events didn't take place. I never ran into them. And then I played it again, knowing that it was meant to be a horror game, and I went a bit further in the story, and I found some of the much more scary moments as you dive deeper and deeper and deeper. And I will always remember the first time that I was in my submarine, the first full-blown submarine, and I was just exploring. I thought, well, I'm going to keep exploring and see what we can find. And all of a sudden, it's very, very dark, and I've got my submarine lights on as low as I can possibly have. And then the voice came over, the detecting multiple Leviathan-class creatures in the region. Are you sure this is worth it? Okay, turning around. I am done. And just, that's all it took. I don't think I saw one. But just having that the knowledge that something was there, the realizing the darkness all around, that fear of the depths of the sea that's sort of latent inside most of us, was enough all on its own. I thought it was a masterful moment.
It's funny that we're bringing this up, and I can think I haven't played Subnautica because I immediately recognized it's not for me. I know that's not going to appeal to me, but it does remind me of Mass Effect 3 when you actually meet Leviathan. I remember watching that cutscene and thinking, like, I don't like this at all. This is the first time in the Mass Effect trilogy where I can imagine myself in Shepard's place, and I don't want to do it anymore. Like, every other situation that Shepard's been, you felt like you were in a little bit of control. You just had to do well and you could get through this. That was one of the first moments in that series where I ever felt like, oh yeah, no, we're screwed because I cannot deal with this psychologically. Like, we're all gonna die because I don't want to go in the water. And that is, I feel like that feeling is the entirety of Subnautica. It's just, nope, I don't want to do that. It's not for me.
But that's a wonderful example, because that's the minimalism in a game as well. Because what I remember from that scene, and I might be making it up, is nothing's happening for quite a long time, and you're just firing these scanners down with these big gaps in between.
The majority of that scene is falling. You're just slowly drifting downwards in the ocean. And that was enough for me to be like, nope, I don't like this. And then you reach the bottom, and it's like, oh, this is worse. This is so much worse.
Yeah. Banana has more than me a science background, but I do have a science background too. And one of them is very specifically marine biology, and I love marine biology. And so I'm glad that was a cutscene, because when you see Shep get in the thing and like, this thing is, how are we going to get back up?
I still wonder that. that was my concern replaying it recently, because watching that cutscene, I was like, nope. And then we got to the bottom, the conversation ended, and I was like, okay, now what happens? Because there's no mechanism for getting out.
I like the confidence. It's like, we should be safe.
Yeah. That was the first time where like I couldn't relate to Shepard, because he was just like, oh, here's something incredibly stupid and reckless that will almost certainly not succeed. Let's do that. And I was just like, no, let's not do that.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you mentioned that, Banana. Yeah, there's also maybe a console group that, I don't know, Baba, you might want to weigh in on this one, but I know Banana has a lot of love and experience with this group. But like Zelda and Mario.
Does it sound like me?
Yeah, Zelda and Mario. I would say like Zelda Majora's Mask has some elements to it that are kind of interesting. And then, of course, Luigi's Mansion, which is very well beloved. But I would say that definitely, you know, it's a spooky themed game. It's not scary necessarily. There's a lot of like little interesting things about that game that make it very endearing.
Both of those kind of represent something we've talked about a little bit previously. And that's the way Nintendo seems to handle darker elements. So we talked about it with Mario. When Mario dies, there's a little jingle, and it kind of softens the blow of the death of a character. I feel like the way Nintendo presents the kind of scarier elements of Zelda and Luigi's Mansion is very cartoony. It's a very, very gentle way of approaching those topics. So Luigi's personality has always kind of been this scaredy cat ever since the television show. And they really play on that in Luigi's Mansion, where he's nervous the entire time. He's scared. but you're never really feeling like you're in danger in that game. It's mostly Luigi is feeling that way, but you as the player are like, we're going on an adventure. This is going to be fun. And that's the same with Zelda. Like in those moments where you're up against, the undead enemies, Zelda doesn't feel scary. It kind of feels like you're kind of getting this gentle nudge into a scary realm, but you don't have to experience any kind of horror. And that seems to have always been Nintendo's vibe with the games they develop. And I think Zelda is one of the very few games that is in-house Nintendo that involves a graveyard for that exact reason. Is Nintendo doesn't seem to want to dwell on the concepts of death and like these genuinely kind of intimidating, scary things, because that's not their direction. That's not the way they want to go. And you don't see that horror element in any of like the major Nintendo series. I mean, it could be that I'm just unaware of them, but I think overwhelmingly the Nintendo stuff, the really successful Nintendo stuff that you see is all very kind of playful. There's not a lot of terror going on. There are certainly moments that are tense, and there might be things that are a little bit scary, but there's not a, flagship horror franchise within Nintendo.
I think it's when you look at elements that you would consider horror in other games or other movies. If you think of ghosts are creepy. The idea, it's very, very unpleasant. And in Mario, they're cute. They're just really, really cute.
Yeah.
So I think just the overall tone, it doesn't lend itself to giving you genuine horror, which is great because that's what they're going for. It's like we talked about recently with Nintendo and sports. They will forgo a lot of the reality so that it's a fun experience. I'd imagine they do the same with horror. They'll make their places dark and a bit creepy, but they're often so over the top, like cartoonishly evil places, populated with enemies that are a bit too cute, that it just lets you have that slight darkness, but never puts you into genuine feelings of fear.
Oh yeah, the mechanic in earlier Mario games of the boos only chasing after you when you're not looking at them, that's adorable. And you get to Super Mario World, and if you just stand still looking at one, it makes a silly face at you if you wait long enough. Like they're very, very cute, and they should be scary based on what they are, but the way they're presented to you, like you're never scared.
This is one of the things that I find fascinating in both, in books, in movies, in film, is how do you actually make it? So in movies and film, in books, in movies and games, how do you actually make it so that when you're playing a horror video game, for example, that you feel scared for your character? How do you make it feel that it's you who's supposed to be scared rather than just your character being in a scary environment? Because I can think of games that are bad, where your character is giving off the most scared vibes in the world, but you're just thinking, this is trash. This is rubbish. This is doing nothing for me. Deadly Premonition, for example. But how do you really make the player feel what the character is feeling? To me, it amazes me that you can actually pass that feeling on to us.
I think Luigi, I could be wrong, but when he gets kind of scared, he starts whistling the Luigi theme to himself to kind of brave himself up.
There are definitely things in that game where you could see like Luigi trying unorthodox methods to get through this.
And it's just genius. Because, they could have just said, oh, here's Luigi just going through and he's shaking because he's scared, but nothing. But he like, there's nothing going on. And he's like, oh, okay. It's really great.
But that's what Nintendo have always been great at. They've always been so good at imparting personality onto their characters and just giving them quirks and traits that are so odd. And it plays on your heartstrings and really makes them appeal.
Well, I'll close this up here pretty soon, but Baba, I know recently you were playing a game that I really found, I liked the game quite a bit, but it didn't get a lot of traction, but I think it had suffered from its linearity, I think, but I'll let you kind of expand upon this. It kind of goes into some spooky themes. It definitely has a lot of elements that are focused on some spectral things, but you played Banishers, Ghost of New Eden. How did you like that game?
You're right. It didn't get very much traction. The story element of the game is really good. You know, the storytelling and kind of like the history of the husband and wife, I guess they are. It gets really bogged down with, hey, go do this quest, come back, go fetch this, come back. It loses a lot in that, and the story kind of just takes a back seat after a while. It did lose my interest as well. That's why I kind of dipped out on it.
But what were the main things that you did in to advance that game? Do you remember?
Go check out this tree in the forest, or find this scroll that's hidden in this house that you know it's going to be in there. You know, it didn't give you a lot of time to,
yeah,
I guess, find out on your own.
Well, the unique thing about it is that it's kind of like a two-party system that you play in a single person game. And so you can take the role of the husband or the wife, but the wife is basically a specter.
So you're fighting those goblins in the other realm, and just to save your husband, and then eventually you do get to team up with him in his reality, I guess.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of like concepts of bringing in the spirit realm and coming in, and it's a very unique game. You don't see that. Like you would think like in God of War where you have like Atreus who's like doing his thing over there shooting stuff, but he's never in a different realm manipulating the situation so that way when you come back to do what you got to do. And so it's a very combat focused game. So I really did like that. So if you like combat and you like a lot of like those type elements, that might be something to look at. But it did do some new things, I think, in that game that I haven't seen done well in other games. So, but yeah, anyway.
I was interested in what Baba said about the game saying at some point, go and do this, go and do that, go and do X. And it just put in my mind that I can't think really of a horror game or a scary game that, how do I say this? The idea of an open world, too much openness in a horror game, I think immediately punishes the game itself. It really needs to be largely on rails. You've got to be guiding me through this. As soon as you give me all that choice, the ability to remove myself from the situation for a while, the ability to go and do something else, it just feels like that really suffers. And I think it's one of those games where the more that a game developer can make me do, the more that a game developer can control the order in which I do things, is going to massively enhance a horror game. And it just put back in my mind something we discussed a long time ago, which is Resident Evil and the camera angles. The way that they force the way you look at different rooms, they force the way that you first interact with a new area. They force that mystery upon you, and you don't get to choose how you approach it. When you go down this corridor with the great big terrifying windows that you're sure something's going to bust through, they're going to make you look at those windows the entire time you're going through there. Maybe something happens, maybe it doesn't. But I think horror, yeah, it really benefits from that on-rails experience. And as soon as we just start diverging and breaking out, or the game tries to distract you with busyness, I don't know how well that works.
I think there's also a point in what Baba said that too much on rails takes away from it as well. So I think he mentioned something about like going in and finding this scroll in a house and you know it's going to be there. That's the too far in the opposite direction extreme. So with a lot of Resident Evil stuff, you know what you need to do. You're not necessarily certain of the path that gets you there fastest, the safest path, or exactly what you need to pick up, interact with, and how you go about doing that. And that ambiguity adds to the horror element to say, like, I know what I want to accomplish. I don't know every step along the way. Yeah. And if I get stuck at one of those steps, it might cost me my life. Like that is a true horror experience, to say that any kind of self-doubt becomes a potentially increasing your odds of not surviving this experience.
I appreciate everybody being here today. Thank you, Baba. We're going to definitely keep Baba on, hopefully cover a couple more topics for the spoopy month we have coming up. We will definitely include Baba's Twitch handle in the description, and we have a new Discord. I remembered to mention it this time. Be sure to join us. Then the link will be in the description below. Join us on YouTube. Follow, like, comment. Please comment. Comments really go a long way with the algorithm. I can't stress that enough. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Baba, for being here, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.